The Underground Railroad, America's Secret Network. Chapter 8: The Echo That Still Whispers. Part 8.1: The Legacy of the Underground Railroad. More than just tunnels and hidden stations, the Underground Railroad became a beacon of hope that would echo through American history, lighting the way for future struggles. It wasn't just a network to escape slavery, it was a movement. A powerful symbol of defiance and resistance against one of the most oppressive systems the world had ever known. Its legacy reverberates through the generations, influencing not just the end of slavery but the fight for civil rights, freedom, and justice that continues to this day. The courage of those who participated in the Underground Railroad, from Harriet Tubman to the countless station masters, conductors, and anonymous helpers, gave birth to a resistance that would later serve as the foundation for the civil rights movement in the 20th century. The very same spirit of defiance that led enslaved individuals to seek freedom also ignited the flame of civil disobedience during the era of segregation. The Underground Railroad was a symbol, a precursor to the civil rights movement that demanded justice for all people, regardless of race. What made the Underground Railroad so transformative was its ability to connect the plight of those escaping slavery to the larger narrative of human rights. Just as Harriet Tubman risked her life time and time again to free people from the shackles of slavery, future generations took inspiration from this bold defiance to demand their rights, challenge oppressive systems, and stand up against the laws that perpetuated inequality. The Underground Railroad was not just about escape, it was about the unrelenting pursuit of freedom and dignity, values that continue to shape our fight for justice today. The abolitionist spirit that fueled the Underground Railroad didn't die with the end of slavery. Instead, it lived on, transformed and renewed, in the fight for civil rights in the 20th century. Just as Martin Luther King Jr. marched for equality, the Underground Railroad served as a guide for those seeking justice, providing not just the physical path to freedom but also the moral clarity that demanded change. The law that Harriet Tubman and her colleagues defied during their journeys for freedom laid the groundwork for the nonviolent protests of the civil rights movement, including the famous March on Washington and the Selma to Montgomery marches. The Underground Railroad wasn't just a means of escape, it became an emblem of resistance, an example of what it meant to stand up against an unjust system. No matter the cost, those who participated in the Underground Railroad didn't just help people escape, they ignited a movement that inspired future generations to fight for equality. The abolitionists and their allies understood that fighting for justice didn't mean just changing laws, it meant changing the very fabric of society. That vision would carry on for over a century, growing into the full-fledged civil rights movement that would eventually change the face of America. The spirit of resistance that defined the Underground Railroad continued through the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. would become the leaders of that movement. But their courage and determination were built upon the same foundation of resistance laid down by those involved in the Underground Railroad. Both movements were rooted in the fight for human dignity, the belief that no person should be treated as property, that everyone deserves the right to freedom, and that laws cannot dictate the moral compass of a nation. Just as Tubman navigated the dangerous paths of the Underground Railroad, future generations would march, sit in, and protest for their rights. Following the Civil War, slavery was abolished, but the road to full equality was long and winding. Even after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were ratified, granting former enslaved individuals their freedom, citizenship, and right to vote, racial inequality persisted. The civil rights movement that emerged in the 1950s and 1960s was a direct continuation of the spirit of the Underground Railroad. The fight for civil rights, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and others, carried the torch of the abolitionists forward. In fact, the momentum gained from the Underground Railroad directly influenced the growth of the abolitionist movement and helped reshape American society in the 20th century. These two movements, one against slavery and the other against segregation, are intricately linked. And the Underground Railroad's legacy is an essential part of the ongoing struggle for civil rights. The abolitionists who once defied the law to bring enslaved individuals to freedom became the models for those who would later defy unjust laws during the civil rights movement. From peaceful resistance to direct action, the Underground Railroad didn't just pave the way for the abolition of slavery. It planted the seeds of the future civil rights movements that would demand freedom, equality, and justice for all people. If you're inspired by Harriet Tubman's incredible journey, don't forget to subscribe to MetaFacts Legends. We dive deep into the untold stories that shaped America. Check out the description for more resources on Tubman's enduring influence in the civil rights movement. Part 8.2: National Monuments and the Preserving of History. From secret basements to hidden barns, these sites are more than just places. They are symbols of the enduring fight for freedom. Across the United States, the remnants of the Underground Railroad stand as testaments to the sacrifices made by countless individuals who defied a system of oppression to seek the one thing that no law could truly take: freedom. But these sites are not only memorials of the past. They are the cornerstones of the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. The preservation of these sites, many of which have been designated as national monuments, represents a recognition of the cultural and historical significance. These places serve as more than just physical landmarks. They embody the spirit of resistance that led to the end of slavery and paved the way for future battles in the fight for civil rights. These sites are not only monuments to those who escaped, but to those who risked everything to help them. They tell stories of courage, defiance, and sacrifice, and they remind us that the fight for freedom is ongoing. One such site is the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park in Maryland, which celebrates the life and legacy of the woman who freed over 300 enslaved individuals. Located near the land where Tubman was born, this site highlights her role as one of the most famous conductors on the Underground Railroad. But Tubman is just one part of a larger story, one that includes countless station masters, conductors, and helpers, whose names often remain unknown, but whose actions were just as crucial in the fight for freedom. The preservation of these sites doesn't just keep the past alive, it creates a bridge to the future, where new generations can learn from the past and apply those lessons in today's fight for human rights. As we walk through the very basements, barns, and hidden paths that once sheltered escaping enslaved people, we are reminded that the fight for freedom didn't end with the Civil War. It was just one chapter in an ongoing battle that echoes into the civil rights movement and beyond. The preservation of Underground Railroad sites is not just about keeping history intact. It's about passing on the torch of resistance and hope. These sites hold stories that inspire us to continue pushing for justice. They remind us that even in the darkest times, there were always those who stood up against the system. And while the Underground Railroad may have been a clandestine network, its impact is now public and celebrated through these national monuments. The fight for freedom was never meant to be forgotten. It was meant to live on and guide future generations in the ongoing quest for justice and equality. One of the most powerful ways these sites impact the public consciousness is through the way they're integrated into the community. Local residents, many of whom are descendants of those who fought in the Underground Railroad, actively participate in the preservation and storytelling of these sites. By becoming part of these living memorials, they help ensure that the past is not lost, and that the next generation can understand the sacrifices that were made for their freedom. These sites serve as a touchstone for all who seek to understand the struggle for freedom and equality in America. The National Park Service oversees many of these sites, including the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park, the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site, and the Uncle Tom's Cabin Historic Site. The effort to preserve these sites has garnered millions of dollars in funding, much of which has come from federal grants and local organizations dedicated to maintaining the history of the Underground Railroad. In addition to national recognition, local communities have also recognized the importance of these landmarks. In Maryland, where Tubman's legacy is most prominent, The creation of the National Historic Park was a significant step in ensuring her story, and the story of those who helped free enslaved people, was shared with future generations. The establishment of these national monuments has also created tourism opportunities, providing educational programs that attract visitors from all over the world. The goal is not only to educate but to inspire a sense of pride and responsibility in the community, ensuring that these stories of courage and selflessness continue to influence the fight for human rights. The struggle to preserve these landmarks is not only about protecting physical buildings or sites, it's about preserving stories, the untold stories of those who risked everything to bring others to freedom. As we continue to honor and protect these places, we also honor the principles they represent: justice, equality, and the courage to stand up against oppression. As we move forward, the importance of preserving these places becomes even clearer. These monuments are more than just a part of history. They are a living, breathing part of America's ongoing battle for civil rights. By preserving them, we ensure that the lessons learned from the Underground Railroad are never forgotten and continue to guide us as we confront the injustices of today. Part 8.3: The Struggle for Civil Rights. Echoes of Tubman's Fight. Harriet Tubman's fight wasn't over when slavery ended. It was just beginning. Her courage became the flame that lit the way for future leaders. The echoes of her bravery continue to resonate, not just in the history books but also in the very fabric of America's ongoing struggle for civil rights. While Tubman's contribution to the abolition of slavery was monumental, her legacy transcended the boundaries of her time. She became a symbol, a beacon of resistance, that inspired generations of activists who fought for justice and equality in the 20th century and beyond. Tubman's life was a testament to the power of action. She didn't wait for the world to change. She took matters into her own hands, risking her life time and time again for the freedom of others. This tireless fight for human dignity made her a perfect parallel to the leaders of the civil rights movement, where the baton of freedom and justice was passed on, just as Tubman led hundreds of slaves to freedom through dangerous terrain. Future leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and John Lewis would lead the masses, pushing for equality and justice in a different but equally dangerous battle. Tubman's actions were not merely reactions to the system of slavery, they were proactive, bold challenges to the injustices of her time. And while she was not around to witness the full impact of the civil rights movement, her spirit, her actions, and her unyielding drive to fight against oppression continued to serve as a touchstone for the battles ahead. The same courage that drove her to liberate enslaved people became the foundation upon which the modern struggle for freedom was built. In the 20th century, Tubman's legacy was resurrected in the lives of those who followed in her footsteps. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr., who led the Montgomery bus boycott and later the famous March on Washington, often cited Tubman's courage as a source of inspiration. Her fight for human rights, grounded in a belief in the inherent dignity of every individual, echoed throughout the civil rights demonstrations of the 1960s. Harriet Tubman didn't just help people escape slavery. She also created a framework of resistance that continued to inspire the leaders of the civil rights movement. Tubman's determination and courage gave way to the creation of nonviolent resistance, a powerful tool that was wielded by civil rights activists in the mid-20th century. Her symbolic role was pivotal in shaping the way the civil rights movement was perceived by the public. When Martin Luther King Jr. led his famous March on Washington in 1963, he often evoked figures like Tubman as representations of what it meant to fight for true freedom. Tubman's story was, and still is, a reminder of how far one can go when fighting for what is right. Even when faced with extreme adversity, the similarities between Tubman's strategies and the strategies of civil rights leaders are profound. Nonviolent resistance, which King championed, echoed the resistance Tubman had demonstrated through her dangerous yet calculated movements. Always one step ahead of those who wished to keep people enslaved. Tubman's careful planning and secrecy, as well as her risk-taking, laid the groundwork for what would later become essential tactics in the civil rights era. The link between slavery abolition and the civil rights movement is not just philosophical, it is quantifiable. The impact of leaders like Tubman on the civil rights movement can be seen in the way modern civil rights activists use their platforms to demand justice. For instance, the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted for over a year, was a direct response to institutionalized racism that Tubman and other abolitionists fought against. This was not just a protest, it was an act of defiance against an unjust system. Similar to the defiance Tubman showed when she led enslaved individuals to freedom. The Freedom Riders, the sit-ins, and the Selma to Montgomery marches were all part of a long tradition of resistance, built upon the foundational work of Tubman and other abolitionists. As history moved into the 20th century, these acts of resistance became not just the fight of African Americans but the fight of Americans everywhere, urging the nation to live up to its ideals of freedom and equality. Key figures like Rosa Parks, who sparked the Montgomery bus boycott by refusing to give up her seat, and John Lewis, who helped lead the Selma marches, often spoke of being inspired by the unwavering resolve of figures like Tubman. They, too, became symbols of nonviolent protest and civil disobedience, directly carrying forward the legacy of those who risked their lives to ensure that freedom and justice were not mere ideas, but realities for all people, regardless of race. In summary, Harriet Tubman's fight didn't end when slavery was abolished, it evolved. She passed the torch of freedom to those like Martin Luther King Jr., who would carry on the work with a new vision and new tools. However, the underlying spirit of her struggle, the refusal to be silenced, the determination to break the chains of oppression, remains a fundamental part of the ongoing fight for civil rights and equality. Her courage, which once guided slaves to freedom, now continues to guide the fight for justice in America and around the world. Tubman didn't just fight against slavery, she fought for a world where freedom and equality were guaranteed for all. Part 8.4. Tubman's Legacy in the Civil Rights Movement. This part will highlight Harriet Tubman's enduring legacy within the civil rights movement. We will explore how Tubman's courage, defiance, and spirit of freedom inspired future generations of activists. Her contributions set the foundation for future struggles for civil rights, ensuring that her fight for freedom would reverberate through American history long after the abolition of slavery. Harriet Tubman, a woman who risked her life to free others, became an enduring symbol for a nation that was still fighting for freedom. Tubman's fight didn't end with slavery's abolition. It became a beacon for the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Her courage as a conductor on the Underground Railroad laid the groundwork for future activists, and her legacy transcended her time, inspiring leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and John Lewis in their battle for racial equality. Harriet Tubman is often remembered for her daring actions on the Underground Railroad, rescuing enslaved individuals from the horrors of bondage. But Tubman's impact didn't stop with the ending of slavery. Her legacy became an integral part of the fabric of American freedom. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, the spirit of resistance she embodied was a powerful influence. Her bravery, unwavering commitment to justice, and tireless fight for freedom became a rallying cry for civil rights leaders. Tubman was not just a hero of the past, she was a symbol of the continued fight for human dignity. Leaders of the 20th century's civil rights struggles often invoked her name as they marched for voting rights, desegregation, and equal protection under the law. Her refusal to accept injustice, her audacity to resist an oppressive system, and her willingness to sacrifice for the greater good became the foundation for future movements that would demand equality for all Americans. The civil rights movement, with its marches, sit-ins, and landmark legislation, was deeply influenced by the ideals Tubman upheld during her own battles for freedom. The fight for equal rights, particularly the right to vote, echoed her struggles on the Underground Railroad, Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. cited Tubman's bravery as a crucial inspiration for their efforts. Just as Tubman defied the fugitive slave laws, later generations of activists defied segregation laws, demanding a nation where all people, regardless of race, could enjoy the full benefits of freedom. Her life is a symbol that defies time. Tubman's actions proved that the fight for freedom is never truly finished. Even after the Civil War, African Americans continued to face oppression in the form of Jim Crow laws, segregation, and disenfranchisement, but Tubman's legacy gave the civil rights movement the courage to persist. Her story and her unflinching commitment to freedom gave hope to those fighting for equality during the 1960s and beyond. Harriet Tubman's legacy is evident in the historical milestones of the civil rights movement. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, can be traced back to the struggles of people like Tubman. Her spirit lived on through the Freedom Riders, who challenged segregation on buses in the South, and in the marches led by Martin Luther King Jr., including the iconic March on Washington in 1963. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, another crucial victory in the movement, ensured that African Americans had the legal right to vote without facing discriminatory practices. This, too, was a direct result of the activism that Tubman inspired, activism that took root in the 19th century and flourished into a full-scale movement for civil rights. Additionally, Tubman's legacy influenced the women's rights movement, as she was not just fighting for the freedom of African Americans but for gender equality as well. Tubman's commitment to both causes made her the symbol of intersectionality long before the term became common in social justice circles. In the years following the civil rights movement, Tubman's legacy continued to inspire movements for justice worldwide. Her life remains a touchstone for all who fight against oppression, inequality, and injustice. As civil rights heroes like Tubman led the way, their legacies empowered those who followed to continue the struggle for justice. From the Underground Railroad to the civil rights movement, Tubman's legacy lives on. Which leaders do you think were most influenced by her? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to check the description for links to more in-depth articles and documentaries about her impact. Part 8.5. The importance of naming the unknown heroes. The history of the Underground Railroad is often told through the legendary figures Harriet Tubman, Levi Coffin, and others who played pivotal roles in guiding those seeking freedom. Yet, there is another essential part of this story: the countless unsung heroes whose names have been lost to time, but whose contributions were equally as vital to the success of this network. These unknown heroes made sacrifices, often at great personal risk, to help free thousands from slavery. Behind every name that we remember from the Underground Railroad, there were dozens of others whose stories were never told. But without their courage, there would have been no movement, no freedom. While figures like Harriet Tubman are immortalized in history books and memorials, there are thousands of individuals whose names remain unknown. Those who quietly provided shelter, food, money, and protection to those escaping slavery. These men, women, and children risked everything to help those seeking freedom. Without them, the Underground Railroad could not have functioned as it did. They opened the doors, hid fugitives in their basements, barns, and attics, and sometimes even walked miles to deliver crucial messages. Their contributions were never celebrated, yet without them, the success of the Underground Railroad would have been unthinkable. The lack of recognition for these heroes is one of the greatest oversights in American history. From the Quakers who risked their lives to help enslaved people escape to African Americans who provided safe houses in their own neighborhoods. These individuals were crucial to the operation of the Underground Railroad, but their efforts remain largely unrecorded. One of the most profound aspects of this network was the sheer scale of the assistance provided. Tubman herself might have been the conductor, but she was able to operate only because of a network of helpers, station masters, abolitionists, and sympathetic communities. Some of these helpers were white, many were free black people, and some were enslaved individuals themselves. In many cases, those who helped did not see themselves as heroes. They were ordinary people who did extraordinary things when faced with the moral imperative to act. There are stories, like that of the stations in small towns, where entire communities would organize and aid the escape of freedom seekers. These people often risked their safety, their homes, and their livelihoods to defy the law. In many ways, these were the true pillars of the Underground Railroad. Yet, in historical records, they are often overshadowed by the leaders we remember. Their names were not written down, their stories were not passed down in textbooks, and yet they were the quiet force that kept the momentum going. While history remembers the great leaders, the absence of recognition for these unsung heroes is in itself a lesson. They are the embodiment of the selfless, quiet acts of resistance that powered the Underground Railroad and the broader abolitionist movement. Their sacrifice and courage represent the true spirit of the struggle for freedom and equality. They are a testament to the fact that history is written not just by the famous, but also by the collective efforts of the many. This collective action, a broad network of individuals and communities working toward a common goal, is what made the Underground Railroad so effective. It wasn't just one person who made the difference. It was the thousands of nameless individuals whose everyday acts of bravery created the underground infrastructure that moved so many to freedom. Their stories may not be recorded in textbooks, but their impact is undeniable. These unsung heroes of the Underground Railroad were not just following orders, they were actively creating change. Their quiet resistance was as much a force for liberation as any high-profile abolitionist. Despite the significant contribution of these unnamed heroes, most were never recognized. However, their contributions are now beginning to be acknowledged in more recent historical analyses. In 2000, a national monument dedicated to the Underground Railroad was established, and for the first time, we began to recognize the broad network of individuals who helped guide freedom seekers. Similarly, in 2016, the National Park Service added several sites to the National Underground Railroad network to recognize not only the major routes but also the homes and locations where small but crucial moments occurred. These memorials and the ongoing research into the people and places that helped shape the Underground Railroad are an important step toward reclaiming these hidden histories. For example, the National Park Service's work in documenting Underground Railroad sites has helped identify the locations where unknown heroes played pivotal roles. In many instances, these people were not celebrated during their lifetimes but are now being honored through the preservation of their contributions. It is important to note that over 3,000 locations associated with the Underground Railroad exist across the United States. Many of these sites are being recognized and preserved today, thanks to the work of local communities, historians, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Yet, despite this growing recognition, countless individuals who helped with these escapes remain unnamed. One of the most impactful contributions to the effort of remembering these unknown heroes has been the Stations of Freedom project, which highlights the stories of enslaved people's escape routes and the people who helped them. This initiative continues to push for wider acknowledgement of the networks and the many unnamed heroes who contributed to freedom. By shedding light on these forgotten figures, we are honoring more than just the past, we are shaping the future. Every time a new Underground Railroad site is recognized or a long-forgotten hero is remembered, we are helping to ensure that the fight for freedom, justice, and equality is never forgotten. We can now see how the collective struggle, led by those whose names have been lost, became the foundation for future generations to continue the fight for civil rights. As we look to the unsung heroes of the Underground Railroad, we begin to shift our focus to one of the most iconic figures of that struggle, Harriet Tubman. The legacy of these unknown helpers is undeniably connected to the legacy of Tubman herself, whose voice still echoes in today's ongoing battle for equality and justice. In Part 8.6, we will explore Tubman's final words, reflecting on the profound impact of her life and the ongoing struggle for freedom. Part 8.6. The final words of Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman's final words were not just a farewell, they were a legacy of resistance, courage, and an enduring call for freedom. The end of Harriet Tubman's life came quietly, but her influence and the echoes of her mission for freedom lived on far beyond the moment of her passing. She passed away in 1913, but by that time, her mark on history had already shaped generations to come. What were her final words? And how do they encapsulate the life she led, the struggles she fought, and the cause she devoted herself to? There's something remarkable in the simplicity and power of Tubman's last words. In the face of everything she had endured, years of slavery, countless escapes, the lives she saved, and the war she fought on behalf of others, her final moments were not filled with regrets or complaints. Instead, she spoke of faith, of a belief in the work she had done, and of the path she had chosen. But her words were more than just a reflection on her life. They were a reminder of the cause that drove her until the end. "I go to prepare a place for you," Tubman famously said, a woman who had risked everything to guide others to freedom. Tubman's final words revealed a deeply spiritual side to the woman who had defied the odds at every turn. It is fitting that Tubman's final act of courage, even in her death, mirrored the selflessness she lived by. She had spent a lifetime leading others to freedom, and even in her final days, her legacy was a beacon for those who would continue her work, standing up for justice and fighting oppression. Tubman, after all, wasn't just a symbol of freedom. She was a catalyst for the change that would continue long after her time on Earth. In her final moments, Tubman was not just a hero who had freed herself and hundreds of others from slavery. She had become a symbol of the unrelenting fight for human dignity. Her story, her courage, and her unwavering faith continue to inspire generations. Her final words proved that her fight was not just for her freedom but for the freedom of all. They became a beacon for all those who had yet to find theirs. Even as her own journey came to a close, Tubman's death in 1913 was a solemn moment for the nation. But it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the legacy she left behind. Her contributions were not just remembered in her lifetime, but her story became foundational to the civil rights movement that followed. The movement for racial equality, the fight for women's rights, and the broader struggle for human rights were all ignited by the acts of courage Tubman demonstrated. Her impact was so profound that the federal government officially recognized her legacy, and several monuments and institutions were created in her honor, ensuring that her story would never be forgotten. In fact, Harriet Tubman's legacy was instrumental in the continued fight for equality throughout the 20th century, particularly during the civil rights movement. Her resilience, her leadership, and her undeniable role as an icon of freedom and justice still resonate today. Tubman may have passed in 1913, but the flames of her fight for justice were far from extinguished. The very essence of Tubman's work, resistance, bravery, and an unyielding belief in the right to be free, became the foundation of a movement that carried on long after she was gone. Tubman didn't just help people escape slavery. She gave them the courage to fight for themselves. A message that would become the rallying cry of the civil rights movement. Her work, though more than 100 years old, remains vital today. The spirit of her final words, a call to prepare a place for all who seek freedom, remains a guiding light, drawing people together to continue the fight she started. I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of two things I had a right to: liberty or death. These were Harriet Tubman's words, her ultimate declaration, not just for her time, but for all time. Her legacy is alive in the work that continues, the struggles that still rage, and the victories still to come. Harriet Tubman was not just a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was a force of nature, a symbol of the hope, power, and determination that leads us all toward justice. Tubman's legacy, carried forward through the fight for freedom and justice, laid the foundation for future battles for equality. Her courage ignited the fires of change, influencing movements in the 20th century that continue to echo her call for liberty. This transition leads us to part 8.7, where we'll explore the continuing struggle and the impact of Tubman's enduring legacy on the generations that followed. Part 8.7, the final impact and the legacy of Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman did not just fight for freedom in her time. She created a legacy that resonates with every generation seeking justice, equality, and freedom. Harriet Tubman's journey didn't stop with her work on the Underground Railroad. It became a symbol of the larger struggle for freedom, inspiring generations of activists, leaders, and ordinary people who stood up against injustice. The Underground Railroad was more than just a network of secret stations and hidden routes. It was a testament to the will of those who refused to accept tyranny and the oppression of human beings. But Tubman's fight and her legacy lived on long after the end of slavery. After the abolition of slavery in 1865, Harriet Tubman remained a tireless advocate for civil rights. She worked alongside suffragists, continued to support the abolitionist cause, and helped many veterans of the Civil War with housing and health care. But most notably, Tubman became a symbol of resistance, courage, and leadership for future generations, especially the leaders of the civil rights movement. Her life, from the Underground Railroad to her role in the fight for freedom and equality, still resonates today. Her legacy echoes in the hearts of those who continue to fight for justice. Tubman proved that one person could change the course of history, and her courage continues to inspire movements for equality, liberty, and justice across the world. Tubman, who was once just a conductor on the Underground Railroad, became a pivotal figure in the ongoing battle for human rights. Her story, her actions, and her unyielding commitment to justice sparked a flame that would carry on through generations. She lived and fought in a time of profound injustice, yet her actions and her unshakable belief in the promise of freedom helped lay the groundwork for future struggles. Especially during the civil rights movement, the echoes of her courage, however, are not just historical. Harriet Tubman's influence was not confined to the 19th century. Her name became synonymous with the fight for justice in the 20th century as civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and John Lewis took inspiration from her courage, her refusal to be silenced, and her determination to free the oppressed. Tubman's spirit was embedded in the fabric of the civil rights movement, and it still reverberates in the fight for equality today. Tubman's death in 1913 marked the end of an era, but her work was far from finished. As America faced the civil rights struggles of the 20th century, Tubman's story was recalled, admired, and emulated by those fighting for justice. Monuments were erected, and her name was immortalized, becoming an integral part of the American story. Her work laid the foundation for the greater civil rights struggle that would unfold in the mid-1900s. Tubman's fearless pursuit of liberty and her role in bringing countless men, women, and children to freedom provided a blueprint for future movements seeking to achieve social justice and equality. The abolition of slavery was only the beginning of the fight. The real battle for freedom was about to begin. I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was one of two things I had a right to: liberty or death. Harriet Tubman's words will continue to echo for generations to come, resonating in the hearts of those who seek freedom and justice. Her legacy is not just in the history books, it is alive in the actions of those who continue the fight for equality. Her courage, her resilience, and her tireless advocacy for the oppressed remain an unwavering beacon of hope. This final part emphasizes Tubman's lasting impact on American history and its ongoing relevance to struggles for justice and equality today. Her legacy is embedded in the very core of the civil rights movement and continues to inspire modern-day activists around the world. The story of Harriet Tubman is not just a chapter in the past, it is a call to action for the future. Harriet Tubman's legacy continues to inspire generations. If you believe her story should never be forgotten, subscribe, share this video with others, and dive deeper into the resources in the description to learn more about how Tubman helped pave the way for the fight for freedom and equality.